UEFA has come in swinging with some huge announcements at the end of the year. So let's talk about it. Well, as we creep it into the final weeks and bits of this year, UEFA has come in swinging with two major announcements for both club and international football. They have redesigned and reformatted the current Women's Champions League for the upcoming seasons, as well as introduced the UEFA Women's Europa League. We knew there was a competition coming around. It was announced just last year, but we've just got an announcement on the name of this competition, how it will look like, what teams will be playing, and what the qualifications route would look like. It's quite confusing, but we will talk all about that today. Additionally, UEFA has announced the prize money for the 2025 Women's Euros. It's a record amount of prize money, and how the allocation looks like is also really, really cool because we're seeing an increase in pretty much every single category. So we'll talk all about that today. Let's talk a little bit about the increased prize money for the Euros, because who doesn't love to talk about increased prize money in women's football? I certainly love to talk about that. UEFA announced the competition prize money will be 41 million euros, which represents a 156% increase from 2022, which is huge. You're seeing an increase in participation fees. So participation fees went from 600k to 1.8 million. Again, all figures in euros. The winner's possible total in 2022 was 2.85 million, so just around 2.1 million, and will currently be 5.1 million when you add in a little bit of the money that will go to clubs and federations and do some of the math. That all sits at 41 million, which was about 16 million in 2022. So you're seeing an increase in pretty much every single category. It's more than double than the 16 million that we saw in the last edition, and it's also 5 times greater than the 8 million pot in 2017. It's actually wild to think that the pot was that small. The entire prize money for the competition was only 8 million euros. Like, it's wild to think it was that little, but it shows how far the game has gone. And also, finally, these players are getting paid, a sum of what they really deserve. Is this what they fully deserve? Probably not. But we're one step closer to getting to a point where we're like, yes, these players and federations and participants are finally getting what they deserve. So to break it down a little bit for you, all 16 teams that participate will receive a 1.8 million euros participation fee. For me, that's great, and that's particularly where I'm thinking about some of the newer teams that are participating. Finland, Portugal, Wales. That 1.8 million participation fee, isn't really that huge, but it's a great sum of money for them to build on the momentum that they're coming in with into their first ever Euros, for example. There's also been an increase in the performance bonuses. So in the group stages, for every win, the team will receive 100,000 euros. For every draw, they'll receive $50,000. The runner-ups also get a significant increase in money. So this time around, they'll be getting 850,000 euros. Now, just a bit of a reminder, the players should be getting about 30 to 40% of the National Association's money, prize money. I think this is where sometimes we've seen loopholes where federations are either not paying their players at all, or they're paying them under the sum of the 30 to 40% that UEFA has demanded. So we saw that a little bit in the 2022 Euros and post era. Hopefully we don't see that this time around, because there's a great sum of money being received here by the federations. Hopefully they don't get too money hungry and start robbing their players. That would be really not very cool. Additionally, a big talk last time around was the club benefits. So this means when a club releases a player to go play at the Euros, they're receiving a sum of money for letting that player go. That budget sees a 33% increase. It goes from 4.5 million euros up to 6 million euros. If you break it down a little bit, clubs were receiving per player per day 500 euros, whereas this time around they're receiving 657. So, it's not a huge increase, but still a significant increase that will incentivize the club takes care of their players and also doesn't cause some sort of friction between the international federation and the club. So if you do a little bit of math, and I've already done that math, the minimum payment per player a club can get for a player who is eliminated from the group stages, so they've only done the groups, they get about 13,000 euros. That's a really great sum of money for the club. The most the club can make out of a single player, so let's say this is a player that has gone from the groups up to the final, is about 24,000 euros. So it'll certainly look very interesting for some of the clubs that are releasing a ton of players. Like, I'm thinking Barcelona for some of the Spanish players, especially if they go far. Arsenal and Chelsea, they have a ton of Swedish, English, different sort of players that will be participating in the Euros. They'll be making a great sum of money for letting their players go. So it's fantastic to see records being set in terms of prize money, the money that the players are going to be receiving, the clubs are going to be receiving, the federations are going to be receiving. This is important in a healthy growth of the game. It needs to be a cycle where everybody is benefiting together and mutually. UEFA is making a ton of money out of the Euros. They made some historic numbers last year round. I expect them to do the same here in Switzerland this upcoming summer. Everybody is being strengthened. Everybody's getting more funding. Players are finally getting paid, again, a sum of what they deserve. And it's one step closer to getting to a point where we're seeing the numbers that these players deserve to be getting. So huge thumbs up on this very, very fun, exciting announcement to end the year. So let's talk a little bit about the Women's Europa Cup League. I'm not sure what we're going to be exactly fixating on, but Club League, it's the Europa Cup. That's the announced name. It's going to start for next season, the 2025-26 season. It's going to be really exciting. This is a second women's football competition. It's obviously going to be Europe-based because it's at a Uefa, so very similar to the Champions League. It's only teams that play in European leagues, so nothing changes there, in case anybody had any confusion. Great way to expand the access to international football. It's a great way to increase the competition of European football, and it also provides additional opportunities for some of the teams that get knocked out of the Champions League. So this is what we'll be talking about. So the tournament will follow a full knockout format. It's going to have a home and away ties, and the final is going to be a two-legged final. In other words, there's no group stages. This is basically a full knockout format competition, no group stages. Okay, different than the Champions League. So there's two routes that teams can qualify or play in the Europa Cup. The first route is a direct entry into the cup. 13 teams will qualify directly, and they've used UEFA coefficients to see who directly gets a qualification. So this will include third place teams from domestic leagues that are ranked 8 to 13. So this includes the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Austria, and Ukraine. Then we will also get the runner-ups from leagues ranked 18 to 24, which includes Switzerland, Albania, Cyprus, Belgium, Serbia, Finland, and Russia. If Russia is still under a ban, Bosnia replaces their spot. So when you look at the leagues that have perhaps struggled to even make a print on the Champions League, this direct entry will give an opportunity for the teams that certainly have never made it into the Champions League. So when you look at the Netherlands, for example, and the third ranked team, they're getting a direct entry. Denmark, Norway, who are leagues who have really led the way when it came to the early days of the Champions League, maybe not so much anymore. You're getting those third team spots, get a competition and get, tough opponents that are ranked similarly in this competition, which is why I think the Europa League is fantastic. And it has some cons, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But 13 teams get a direct entry from some of the leagues that I just mentioned. The second route is Champions League qualification. And you're like, what? How are they qualifying for the Champions League and playing here? Well, they don't qualify for the Champions League. In fact, they're eliminated from the Champions League qualifiers, and then they slot into here and have a chance to play here. So 11 teams are usually eliminated from the Champions League second qualifying round. They will enter the first qualifying round of the Europa Cup, and then an additional 20 teams usually are disqualified from the second and third rounds. They will also enter the second qualifying round. So they too will have to battle some of it out to then go and play the teams that already got a direct entry. Now, I don't know how this is exactly going to look like when you look at the schedule. Like, this looks like a ton of added games. And to me, I'm a little bit concerned and worried of how that's going to look like post Euros. Some of the players that we're going to be looking at haven't really had a moment off. So you're talking club football, and then the 2023 Women's World Cup, and then more club football, and then the 24 Summer Olympics, and then more club football, and then the Euros. And then it's like you're going to have these qualifiers be really close to it. And I wonder what the strain of that going to be. This is where some of the worry settles in, and this is where some of the worry settles in too for the direct entry teams that probably don't have the support that the other big dogs have, right? And this is where I'm concerned about the strain on some of the players. Are the clubs able to support those players? What are some of the things that UEFA are putting in place and taking into consideration to support some of these clubs that are going to be playing this new competition? They certainly will be getting a sum of money and just direct participation, but how is that money going to be broken down? And most importantly, again, it goes back to how are these players going to be supported? And so some concerns there. It'll be interesting to see how they address it, because they certainly have to address it. It's brilliant that we get to increase competition, we get to maximize participation, but you also have to consider the calendar constraints and player load. And some of the plans that UEFA has released earlier this year does pledge and promise to take player load into consideration, but I mean, it's all talk unless we start seeing that actually player load is being put into consideration. With that also comes a change in format of the Women's Champions League. Now, the competition has gone through multiple different reformats, the most recent one being the 2021-2022 season. Since then, we've seen great matches, some, record stadium attendances, TV audience. The interest has never been higher, especially bouncing off the Euros. I mean, it was just one height after the other. It was one record after the other. And this format has really been quite successful, I think, for the most part, I would say. UEFA believes that with this new format, they'll be able to deliver more exciting matches for supporters and an even better sporting experience for players. To me, that sounds like a win-win, but it's probably a little bit more complicated than that. So what does the reformat looks like? The number of clubs participating in the league stage has increased from 16, which is the current one, up to 18. Now, the format change comes in without a change in the number of matches. Okay, so even though there's more teams participating, that first stage is still going to be the same amount of number of games. So under the new format, teams will no longer play 3 opponents twice, which is the current format. In each group, there's 4 teams. Each team plays 3 opponents twice, home and away. That's been the format that this season is ongoing, and it has been for the last few years. But instead, so that's going to get scrapped, and instead, they'll have fixtures against 6 different teams in the league stage, playing half of those at home and the other half away. To determine those 6 different opponents, the teams will be ranked in 3 seeding pots based on their latest club coefficient ranking. That's pretty much standard, different pots depending on coefficient, so that the draw could be as level and as balanced as possible. What that means is that each team will then be drawn to play 2 opponents from each of these pots, playing 1 match at home, the other away. Therefore, who qualifies looks a little bit different, and so based on the coefficient that UEFA has released, the runner-ups of France and Germany both qualify for the Champions League automatically. So in this case, if we were pretending that it was this season, you'd have Bayern and Wolfsburg automatically qualify, as well as PSG and Lyon also automatically qualify. Now, we know PSG obviously is not in the current Champions League because they lost in the qualifiers. It would be a different scenario under this new format, as well as the Italian and Portuguese champions get full and direct entry. I'm a pretty big fan of this with the way that Liga BPI has progressed in Portugal. I think we desperately need to see a Portuguese league in the Champions League every single year. Obviously, Benfica missed out this year because they lost to Hammarby in the qualifiers. Italian team, also, I don't like the fact that Roma or Juventus have had to go through qualifiers and have sometimes not been able to make it. So Italian and Portuguese champions get direct entry this time around for next season. So do the runner-ups of France and Germany. That's how you get the teams and the different competition that UEFA is looking for, basically. It's also worth noting that the winners of the Europa Cup will qualify for the second round of the following season of the Champions League and the Champions Path. I think, for me personally, that's one of the coolest additions, is that this could be a team that has basically never had a chance, maybe, possibly, to participate in the Champions League, and now are getting a chance to qualify for the Champions League. Now, this also could play out as a team who just lost in the qualifiers of the Champions League, went on to dominate the Cup, and then, was probably qualifying for the Champions League qualifiers. Anyway, kind of confusing, but what we do know is there's going to be fun competition with the Europa Cup. We're going to be seeing some new talent, new teams finally get on the stage. And that to me is super, super exciting. For the UEFA Women's Champions League, we're seeing a bit of a different format. It'll be exciting to see better competition take on good competition as well. 18 teams going from 16. That's more exposure and more teams and more players finally getting a brighter spot. They'll have to be reformatting of the rights deal that the current UEFA Women's Champions League is under. The DAZN deal or DAZN deal expires post this current season anyway, so comes at a perfect timing. Well, they have to renegotiate. I'm pretty certain the Europa Cup and the Champions League will come under the same rights bundle. That's me completely assuming, but that to me makes the most amount of sense. If you're giving access to the Champions League, then you probably should be giving access to this new competition, up and coming competition that will feature teams that just got knocked out of the Champions League qualifiers. So to me, that would make sense. It'll be interesting to see if they go with DAZN again, if they have their own product, like what is it going to look like? I guess we'll have to stay tuned. TNT has been in the conversation, and so we'll see if they go with that or they stick with DAZN again. As always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. And I will see you later.